Hello, viewers, and welcome to another episode of Reminiscences. Our guest today is Carlton Lindsay Barrett, who is a Jamaican Nigerian that has worked in Jamaica, in the Europe and West Africa, in the media and the academia. He came to Nigeria in the late 1960s and has since naturalized and has uh, contributed significantly to the cultural life of the country as a poet, as a journalist, as a broadcaster. He participated in the first TAC 1977 event and has worked in various media and public relations jobs in the country, as you'll hear. Uh, Thank you, Mr. Barrett, for joining us in this program. And I'd like to take you back to your origin in Jamaica. Tell us about it before we come to how you left it and come to Nigeria.
Well, it's a very simple story because when I was very young as 5 years old, I went to live with my grandparents because my father, who was an agriculturist, was going to another part of the Caribbean on assignment. And my mother died in childbirth, having me. So he didn't have my mother to leave me with, so he left me with my grandparents. My grandfather was a remarkable influence on me because very early in life, he told me that we Jamaicans, especially Jamaicans of African descent, should always try to remember our African heritage. And he told me we should regard ourselves as Africans first, not Jamaicans first. And I remember that from very early in my life. So all my life, all my adolescence in Jamaica, I was closely attracted to the African interests of Jamaica's culture. The Rastafarians are people who dream always of their African roots. And I was attracted to their thoughts. I was also deeply influenced by the thoughts of the great Marcus Garvey, who said that we are Africans first and Jamaicans second. But most importantly, probably because I grew up without my mother, I've always felt that we should keep close attachment to our roots, whatever roots we felt attracted to. And that has been the direction of my life.
How much schooling did you do in Jamaica? What schooling?
I only did up to what is today called school cert, secondary school. But after I left secondary school, I did professional training at both the biggest Jamaican newspaper, very world famous paper called the Daily Gleaner there. Today it is called the Jamaica Gleaner. And I also did professional training in broadcasting for 2 years in the Jamaica Broadcasting Company. And when I exiled myself from Jamaica at the age of 20 and did my training in London at the BBC and at an institution called the Transcription Center. I did professional broadcasting for about 3 years before I came to Nigeria.
Did you work in Jamaica at all in the media?
I worked in the Daily Gleaner I was a reporter in the Daily Gleaner and the Star. I was a very popular columnist, writing on entertainment and in the music business. For I spent 2.5 or 3 years doing that and did a lot of work for which I'm still remembered interestingly. I still get letters from people who are now in their 80s like myself, who remember things I wrote 40, 50 years ago.
So, what motivated what you call exile to the UK? As a young man,
When I left Jamaica, I had intended to come to Africa. My major purpose for traveling from my home was to get to know Africa. To be honest, most of us in those days were young people in those days. A lot of us were attracted to the ideas of Zeke and Nkrumah. We saw them as our leaders, Kwame Nkrumah and Zeke. We thought that we wished our leaders would be like them.
So, how was your stay in the UK, in London, trained in the BBC? Was it fulfilling? Did you find it?
Well, yes, but you see, I've always been a freelancer. And very early in my professional career, I decided that I would not follow academic training as much as professional training. And I was still a believer in the apprentice system. I was brought up in the apprentice system. You had to go through an apprenticeship in the Daily Cleaner to be a reporter. When I took school cert, I got a distinction in maths, a credit in geography or something. But when I went for training at the Daily Gleaner, they told me that my pass in the school cert was not high enough because I had got a grade 3. But when I brought the results of my subjects, the editor of the paper looked at it and said, "Look, how did you get a distinction in English and a grade 3? That means you were good in nothing else, only in English. Then you definitely should work for us." So I was given a reporter's beat almost as soon as I entered the paper, which was unusual because the system for training in the Gleaner had been that if you come in and you want to be a reporter, they start you in the printing press. They start you in another part of the paper and tell you to learn about producing a paper before you think you can write.
Yeah.
But in my case, they said you can write, you can start by writing.
So, was England something? Did you find it really worthwhile?
Yes,
Even though it was a stopgap, you wanted to go elsewhere. But how was your stay there?
it was very eye-opening for me. For one, I couldn't get a job. I tried to get a job in Fleet Street. In those days, for racial and other reasons, it was very difficult. And because I had been given professional training, or I should say, but because I had been given professional training in Jamaica, some of the papers, like the Melody Maker and a few smaller papers, told me they would take work from me on a freelance basis. So I started writing professionally in the freelance world. There were 3 newspapers that I worked for then. One was a magazine called Daylight. Then there was another magazine at the time called Flamingo, which was run by West Indians. And there was the West Indian Gazette and a few other papers. a few other smaller papers. But where I got most of my training and a lot of experience was in music journals, like as I mentioned, Melody Maker. And there were, I love the music of jazz. And I used to write about jazz a lot. So I became quite well known between 1962 and 1964 in Britain for covering jazz festivals and jazz concerts.
When did you get the opportunity to come to Africa? Sure. And which place did you land?
Well, I went to live in Paris in 1963, and I met, my very first African experience really was meeting a Nigerian from Katsina, whose name was Aminu Abdullahi. We were both jazz buffs, and we met at a very popular jazz club in London. His name was Aminu Abdullahi. We became
This was 63, 62?
62, and we became closer than brothers. He opened my eyes about Nigeria, told me a lot about his home. But at one point, we were living in the same block of flats, and we were virtually living in each other's home. And Aminu told me a lot about Nigeria. So he was the one who helped me get a job with a company called the Transcription Center that used to produce radio programs for Africa. And I used to do book reviews and concert reviews for the Transcription Center. I think there was a program called Africa Abroad or something like that, for which I used to contribute. The Transcription Center sent programs to African countries.
Okay.
And that was my first consciousness of Africa, of living and working with Africans. When I finally did come to Africa in 1966, I discovered a lot of people knew my name because they had heard my programs.
Yes. Which part of Africa did you come to the first?
I first landed in Dakar, as I studied there. I landed in Dakar in 1966. And at the end of the festival,
So you came for the first
for the first Festac,
festival
Festival
of
I would have, I was supposed to go back to Paris, but I didn't. I decided that since I had come to Africa, I wanted to go to Ghana. But by the time the festival ended, Ghana, Nkrumah had been overthrown. And I didn't like the idea of a military government at all. But at that time, I went to Sierra Leone because I had friends there, including the new vice chancellor then of what was the new University of Sierra Leone. So I went and stayed with him. First, I don't really remember how long I stayed, a month or two. But while I was there, an English historian, Michael Crowder, the man who actually wrote a book about Nigeria. He was head of the extramural department at the university. And I had developed an interest in telling African tales, re-narrating African folk tales on radio. So I went to him to ask him if they were interested in supporting such a program. And he told me they were interested, but what he wanted us to do was collect as many of the old tales of Sierra Leone. So he gave me a job as a consultant to do that. And I traveled up country and became very interested in the culture of Sierra Leone. I was preparing this, but because I didn't have a job as such other than the little job he gave me, which wasn't paying enough, I decided I would start writing for West Africa magazine. Because before I left Europe, I had spoken to one of their editors, whose name was Kate Whiteman. I started writing a few commentaries on the politics of Sierra Leone, and a number of things I wrote, when some of the politicians saw them, they didn't like them because I was a bit critical of things I saw wrong at that time. So my host, Professor Nicol, told me one day, you should be careful. This is a small country and it's not, you can't get away with so many things. Said, but Nigeria is a very big and very welcoming country, very hospitable and very exciting. So if you get a chance, maybe you should visit Nigeria.
Okay, so tell us about your the beginnings of your stay in Nigeria. Did you,
As I say, I was unfortunate to have landed just and to have gone to Ibadan to stay just when the second coup happened.
67,
66.
66,
66 July.
yes.
And I wrote about the coup from my point of view, and I particularly tried to point out to the paper, because it was in London, and there was a lot of, the coup broke a lot of reports in the British press, and the mood in the British press was that there had been a Muslim coup against the Christian South. And I found that very wrong. Although I was new, it seemed very wrong. I went to meet officers of the Nigerian army to ask them what the coup was about. And the person I met told me, said, we did not want to be politicians. We are being forced into the politics of state. I remember him saying to me that
This was, he said, Colonel Martin
Adamu, and he was very unhappy. He said he was unhappy about what had happened, but that they couldn't avoid it. They had to take, and that their hope was that they would soon return the country to proper political rule. And so I became very, I liked the idea of the government because I saw it as a corrective act, and that was the start of my long stay.
Yeah. So did you stay in then? I mean, my sense is you didn't have any particular job to do. You just continued as a freelance.
Actually, what happened was I continued writing regularly, almost every week, on something about Nigeria. And as a result, in 1967, when it looked like they were really heading for a civil war, Asika, who was a member of our chat group in Ibadan,
Babi Asika.
Asika, now said to me, it was Asika and Esianudom who actually persuaded me to stay longer in Nigeria, right? And it was MD Yusuf, who Aminu Abdullahi, who was still in London, right, sent me to. And he sent me to an immigration officer in Ibadan with a letter and told the man to give me an extended visa stay and that I was under his protection. At the time, I didn't realize who MD was. I didn't see what was in the letter. He showed MD showed me a copy of the letter many years later. The first letter in which he wrote, taking a charge of me.
At that time, he was commissioner of police or something.
No. He was head of E department,
The intelligence.
predecessor of SSS. But he was, it was cause, and I didn't know.
So did you get involved with Asika's government? Because he then became administrator
Director
of.
of information I was appointed director of information in the war zone by the Federal Ministry of Information to work with Asika, where I worked to the end of the war.
How was the experience of the war for you as a foreigner?
Well, it was very enlightening. For one, I don't know what is happening nowadays. I see a lot of things being said. But the truth is that the Civil War came about almost by accident. I think the young men in the army were given a bad, they were unlucky. They were not lucky to become rulers of Nigeria. They were unlucky because it was personal disenchantment that seemed to represent the country at that time. And
So you're saying the coup was fueled by personal ambition more than any other
no,
patriotic. The first year, January 66.
January 66 was an error. Was an error of judgment by very patriotic, but unfortunately naive young men. And the coup did not succeed. That is what is forgotten. The first coup did not succeed, but the military found that the political system had been so devastated by the killing of the real leaders of the country. So Iransi, unfortunately, inherited government rather than being put in place. Iransi was not put in place by the coup makers. The Civil War now came about as a result of these errors. And the Civil War that Nigeria got into should never have happened. It's very sad.
Let me take you into the details of your involvement, the Civil War, public enlightenment, and journalism about it. In the course of that, you met so many of the leading Nigerian military elements. Reading about you, I could see you became friends, Anjuma, Martin Adamu, you mentioned, IBB, and many of them.
Well, the truth is that it was a lesson for me. It was the earliest stage of the war. I got to Enugu almost immediately after it was captured in 1967, September or October. I don't quite remember. But, I learned so much about the intellectual engagement of the military. And I found that the Nigerian military officers were genuine patriots. Most of the young men I met at that time, people like then Lieutenant Colonel Tanzuma, Major Shellen, Major Babangida, Major Vatsa, and so on, who became very close personal friends. What struck me was that my idea of the military was very wrong. They were devoted patriots. There was a remarkable thing which I wrote about in West Africa at the time. The fact that The Civil War, I thought it had ended in the first few weeks because within a 10-day period, Danjuma had captured the capital of the secessionist era. We thought the war was over. It lasted for another 30 months. Now, what I found was that the Nigerian officers I met had a vision of Nigeria that was national. And the Nigerian military was a national institution, whereas the opponents wanted to,
The rebels.
well,
Yeah, I mean,
I don't like
the Biafrans, shall we call it?
you know what I call them is the misled Nigerian officers who had gone to the other side. I don't think they were actually comfortable with their own behavior. And I've always said that the truth is that the loss of the secessionist side was predictable because they had been trained to be Nigerian officers and they had gone against their true training. That was the feeling I had to the end of the war.
Did you ever have a chance to meet Ojukwu and maybe get...
I met him many years after the war. I interviewed him, did a long interview and lost it. But I met him and we spoke and we were very...
So what was your sense? That has he kind of regretted?
He told me, there was one thing I never forget, him telling me, I wish I hadn't lost the tape. He told me that at independence, he was more than 100% a Nigerian. And that...
This is in 1960.
Yes, he said that independence, I was more than 100% Nigerian.
Right.
And I had wanted that to guide my life. That's what he told me. I never forgot it.
What about Benjuma? He's another major thinker about whom actually he wrote a biography. What kind of person?
I was strongly influenced by his discipline and his realism in war. He was a very comfortable person to be with, although he had the most uncomfortable assignment as 2IC of the 1st Division. And we were attacked in his troops were always being attacked, but he was always cool. He was also the most reasonable leader of soldiers because he seemed always to be ready to endure what the followers, the rank and file, were. He was a commander in the trenches, and that impressed me. The reason why I wrote it, let me tell you how I wrote the biography. Many, many years after, I remember reading somewhere that Danjuma had said that nothing would keep him in government beyond when they left, that he wasn't interested, and that he felt all those who had had high political office should leave service. I thought it was strange, and it reminded me of my younger days when I didn't like the military at all. The early days of my life, I was very anti-military. It was my experience during the Civil War that made me understand the more human side of the military. And my observation of General Gowon, who I found to be the most humane military leader one could imagine. And so, because of this feeling in my mind, I was always observing from a distance, but observing General Danjuma. And when he decided to leave office, I was trying to write an article. I had been commissioned by New Breed magazine, uh, which was a new magazine set up by a Nigerian. They had commissioned me to do an article about General Danjuma. My then very good friend, the late Major, then he was then, I think he was then a brigadier, Maman Vatsa, was Danjuma's military assistant when he was chief of army staff or so. So I went to him to say, I want to write an article at the end of this government about General Danjuma. I had written out some things of my impressions, I had done some research and I needed things, I needed them to correct some of my viewpoints. And he said to me, it was Vatsa who said to me, why are you just writing an article? Why not do a book? Said, because the man has been responsible for a lot of our careers and so on. So we'll give you all the information. So what they gave me, I had already written my article. What they gave was just selected information about his early days in the military school and so on. So it was not, I always tell people, it was not a very good book as far as I'm concerned. It was just a book to tell people in Nigeria a little more about him and how he had influenced the military.
But were you surprised about the Njuma's later career? Came a very rich man involved in the politics of Nigeria in many ways, even though not directly.
Well, I see him as a man who set out with direct focus. He's always a very focused person. Once you know him, you find that he's not frivolous. He never is. So I know that when he decided to go into business, he took it the same way he had taken the military, his military profession. He was very focused. So I'm not surprised that he was very successful in commerce. I don't know much about it, but what I do know is that he has been a remarkable philanthropist, but he doesn't talk about it. He hardly ever says anything. We hardly hear what he does, but when you discover, I just recently did some research, and when I discovered what he has done as a philanthropist, it's remarkable. The amount of hospitals the man has built, like government. So I say, I'm not surprised. And I think he decided to turn his back entirely on his previous career. But when he became Minister of Defense, I was surprised. But I think it's, again, you see what I say, that when you get to know the military, you discover that they are very much intertwined with each other. And just as differences of opinion in the military led to the instability that brought about successive military governments, it's the same thing same interaction that brings about stability if you properly handle.
Yeah, I'd like you to talk about two other personalities you have mentioned quite often. One, Aminu Abdullahi. Many younger Nigerians probably wouldn't remember him, that he came back, became editor of New Nigeria, and died in a fire incident in Lagos.
Let me tell you about Amino. He was a remarkable human being. When I met him in London, he was one of the most famous broadcasters in London. He was always on the BBC doing jazz programs. He was an expert on Afro-American literature and jazz. And that was that's what he concentrated on. I was very closely allied to Afro-American literature because I had been a friend of James Baldwin at dinner. James Baldwin, famous writer. And I became very interested in the work of Richard Wright. Aminu was an expert on the work of Richard Wright.
Did you get involved with him when he came back to Nigeria? Were you surprised he came back and became editor?
We were close friends. He came to visit me in Nigeria, in Enugu during the Civil War. When he came to Nigeria, he came straight to the war front to see me. And we remained very close friends. In fact, the day he died, he was waiting on me I was supposed to have met him.
Do you think it's an accident that
It was an accident.
nothing?
He didn't know there was a fire. He was on the top floor of the Nitel building.
Lagos.
Yes, because our mutual friend, Kalban Bauchi, what was his name? Ibrahim Tahir was minister of.
He was chairman of the
Chairman of Nitel, and he had given. We were all friends. Yes.
So there was a penthouse there.
Even the penthouse too. So Aminu woke up and apparently heard the noise and didn't realize it was a fire. Caught in the lift and got trapped and died from smoking inhalation.
What of MD Yusuf?
Well, MD Yusuf was been like my father, very close and he kept me and took care of me. Very close.
Did you get involved with Nigerian politics after you had become naturalized yourself? At what point did you really become a Nigerian?
I've remained a Nigerian, especially since the 1990s when I was given discretionary documents.
This is 1990?
1991 or 92. So it was IBB who actually gave me Nigerian citizenship. He wanted me to travel with him to Namibia for the independence.
Right.
He called me, and when I put in my Jamaican passport, he said, "You mean you're not yet a Nigerian?" I said, "I've been waiting for you to." So he ordered that I give me citizenship. But anyhow, I don't want to talk about that. It's very, very, how would I put it? It makes me think that I have not been as serious.
But you are part of the politics of that era, the IBBS.
I'm not really a part. I commented a lot on politics from the position of giving advice as an observer. And I will always remain an observer. I pray that Nigerians will become harmonious among each other. You see, let me say what I think about Nigeria. I told you that my dream when I was in Europe was to come and be a Ghanaian. Why? Because Nkrumah had created an ideology that included the global Africa. And so I wanted to be a part of that movement. When Nkrumah was overthrown by soldiers, I was sadly disappointed. And I came to Nigeria because I thought maybe here in Nigeria I would find a similar movement. I didn't find a similar movement, but I found something even more interesting globally. And that is that Nigeria is a country of such diversity that what I understood maybe a year or two after I came, it began to occur to me that Nigeria was many countries. Many countries, because after working in the East during the Civil War and coming back and then later becoming very close to the people of the Niger Delta, I realized that the cultures in Nigeria are almost like different countries. But if all of them could merge and work in harmony, it would be a greater country than America, because that's what America has been trying to be. That's what.
A melting pot.
Yes. Nigeria is the melting pot of all Africa.
What is this about you and the Niger Delta? Did you acquire that through maybe marriage or what?
Well, through marriage, yes, but more than that, I discovered long ago, many years ago, I wrote an article in the Sunday Times, which became very widely known, because I was writing an advertising supplement for a gentleman who was the federal lands officer. His name was Ranami Abba.
Who?
Ranami Abba.
Abba.
He was also vice chairman of the NPN, Shagari's party. He was the South vice chairman. When I wanted to write the article, I found it very strange. This was an Ijaw man, or an Ogbia man actually, who was the federal lands officer. So I found it. I said, Banami, how did you leave that far place and get to the top of the federal? So he told me that, look, his village was so far away. This was 1971. He told me that his village was so far away that there was no road to his village. And his village was the next village to the founding well that started Nigeria's oil industry. So I said, how is that possible? And you can't. He said he hadn't been home for 27 years or so, that when he wanted to see his mother, they would bring her son. So he gave me 20 pounds because I was writing this supplement. And I said, I want to know where you come from. Don't know how to write about you are retiring from the federal government. And I want to know what kind of person I am. So he said, I give you 20 pounds. Because in those days, I think the plane fare to
Takot?
and so yeah, but
Just leave Takot because
was it? He gave me, was it 20 pounds or 20? 1971 pounds, I think. I think it was 20 pounds. I can't quite remember. But he gave me the money and said, try and see if you can. Well, you go to Port Harcourt, you take a boat to Brass. From Brass on a Thursday, there's a boat that will take you to Brass.
that's a week.
So that's what I did. I traveled to the Niger Delta, went to Brass, loved it. Brass looked like Jamaica. And when I got to the Nigerian Delta, everywhere there looked like the Caribbean. And the people were very different from people I had met in Lagos. So I was very fascinated about the territory. And I traveled and I spent 1 week in a village called Otwasega. And I went and saw the first oil well, which was just on the side. And there was no road. And there was no road in that area at that time. I traveled by canoe. So when I got back, I was then writing occasionally for the Sunday Times. I think Samamuka was then the editor also. So I now wrote this article with photographs of the place I've been to and how this is the beginning of a multi-billion-dollar industry and you can't get to the people's place. And that and then I wrote the article for Rana Abbas company, the supplement, saying that he came from an area where there were no roads, but which was the source of enormous wealth for the country. And I warned that if this was not corrected, it would be the beginning of a revolution in Nigeria. So a lot of people got in touch with me. I'll not forget Hope Harriman and other people got in touch with me and said, look, this thing you wrote you are very right. And so because of that, a lot of people now in this Niger Delta movement have always remembered it and got in touch with me. And I wrote several other things after that.
Did you get to live in the Niger Delta?
Yes, I've lived there for the last 20 years.
Where in particular?
Yenagoa. I've lived on and off. At one point, I did move to more than 30-something years ago. I married somebody from Abonema.
Abonema is where?
It's west of River State.
Tell us about your marriage. I was going to come to that.
Well,
because that makes you really a Nigerian now. Fine.
I've been married 3 times.
To Nigeria?
To Nigeria. And my first wife left me because I went to Europe and spent a long time and didn't come back. And she probably thought I wasn't coming back. When I came back, I was very disappointed and very sad. And I wish I had not done that. I was at fault. My second marriage, we fell out. We had disagreements. My third marriage has been wonderful, remarkable. And we've been married for 25 or 26 years. And she's, I've lost my leg, so I can't move around, but she takes care of me.
So all these marriages are from Niger Delta. Why you found a home?
Nigeria is the only home I've ever had. Look, I left Jamaica when I was 20 years old. And Nigeria is the only home I've ever really had. As I told you, I had thought I would settle in Ghana. But when I left Jamaica, I made up my mind that I was going to settle in Africa. And I'd always thought that I would settle in Africa. But one good thing about me and Nigeria is that I have found Nigeria. Nigeria didn't find me. I've come to the conclusion that I can't live anywhere else. I would like to visit Jamaica, but I'll be a visitor.
Yeah.
Because if my attitudes have been shaped by my experience in Nigeria.
Have you had a chance to visit Jamaica over the years?
Once only.
Only
I
once?
visited my father in 1996 And in 1997, he died. Or was it 90? I visited in 1997. And in 1998, he died. I think. I'm not sure.
Just say you have never been to Jamaica.
No. And if I do, it will be to take my children to see how they like it.
Have you met another Jamaican Nigerian called Patrick Wilmot, Dr. Wilmot, who taught in
He was
ABU?
my very close friend. We are very close. Still tomorrow we write to it, we speak to each other on the phone. Patrick was like a brother. You know, we were both associate editors of Uchetsuku Marriages Afriscope magazine, okay.
And also close to MD Yusuf, all the two of you.
Yes, we were both close to MD Yusuf. MD was a remarkable human being. I cannot ever be able to thank him enough for what he did for me. He taught me about Africa.
Do you think with all this, since you're Nigerian yourself, given all the problems we have, do you think Nigeria can really find its own potential?
Of course, Nigeria can find its own potential. Unfortunately, many Nigerians have gained power who do not think about Nigeria's best interests, but think only about their best interests. And that is an unfortunate thing. We must try to advise them to change. Look, I've just read an incredible book, and that is Abig's biography, let me put it that way. And he says exactly the same thing. The truth is that we have to work at nation building still, because at independence, we were not given a nation, we were given several nations. And unfortunately, in Nigeria, a lot of us fight for our personal nations rather than the national cause. But I think that is only to be expected. And we must learn to overcome the personal and go after the national.
Let me ask you about the one Niger Delta person who became president, Goodluck Jonathan. You also wrote a little bit about it. Well, what do you make of his time? So let's leave.
Well, I think he did his best, but there were errors made in his organization that were taken as being his own. And so it worked against him, against reinstalling him. He was constitutionally due for
Actually, to a second term,
he was constitutionally, I think, was.
but he didn't get.
But one of the funniest things, I'm afraid to say this because I may be misconstrued, but I believe that the errors that were made by members of his team were visible, were discernible, and should have been treated as errors and corrected. There was a period which I thought that having come to power by such an unusual means, it might have been unusual, but it was feasible. If Goodluck had stepped down and handed power to one of the Northerners who made it very plain that they were no longer backing it, something interesting would have happened in Nigeria, because he would have been entitled still to a second term And what would have happened in future, we don't know. But it would have been very possible that he could have been given a second term later. So I suggested it, but it was considered too far-fetched.
Naive, eh?
Yes. So, but you see, that's what I'm saying. Nigeria is in the process of nation building, and nothing should be taken for granted.
You are now retired and living in Abuja. So how you say day to day?
Well, I'm not really retired. I'm still looking for a job. I want somebody to give me a job to do a column as an old man and from old age. But all the papers tell me now, we publish you, but we can't pay. So that's, but my novel Song for Momo is being republished in Britain right now. And I'm trying to establish a publishing house to publish a few things. And some of my children are rallying around. So I hope I'll leave a legacy. Yeah. I'm at the age where you know whether you like it or not that the time is near. So I'm just waiting.
Yeah, but you sound like you said. I mean, you are retired but not tired. You still want to carry on.
I want to tell you, I believe that it is important as long as you are around to pass on the benefit of your experience to others. And you should always do that. If it is your last day, be sure that you're passing something on.
Thank you very much for this very enlightening conversation about your life. And viewers, I hope you have benefited from this insight into the life of Mr. Carlton Lindsay Barrett, Jamaican Nigerian, who has been part of our life in this country for the last 50 years. Thank you for joining us until another edition of this program. Goodbye.